I want to introduce Danyetta, that I'm just elated and pleased, and we're greatly privileged to have with us. Danyetta is a senior community builder at Starfire Council in Cincinnati, Ohio. She's trained direct support professionals and been a support professional for 20 years while working in different agencies in Ohio and Tennessee. She's also worked in Nebraska for Boys Town, being a family teacher. So she's lived and worked in Nebraska, has quite a bit of experience here. She's supported several people in long-term roles, being part of the community, getting connected to the community, and engaging different approaches of having person-centered community building, citizen advocacy, and what's called asset building. They've converted their agency over time from being sort of more typical to transform into being part of the community. What she has to share with us today is so much about how do we help people be connected to the community? How do we help people be connected to associations and volunteer groups and church groups, and just be part of active life in the community? And that's what Danyetta's been involved in, is going to share with us techniques and processes that they've learned and found. So with that, Danyetta, I'm just elated to have you with us, and privileged, and thank you for coming be with us. You're on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So welcome to this webinar, Born to Live in Community, when people we support become members and citizens lean in. I know that many of you are service coordinators and supervisors, provider agency staff, families, and people with disabilities. And there are some of us from the traumatic brain injury and physical disabilities and council on aging communities. So welcome to all. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you so much. And I appreciate Anne, who's here helping, and Kristen Larson and Tony Green for the opportunity to share with you today. I've been working, as Mark mentioned, I worked in the field as a DSP, a direct support professional, and a trainer since 2000, when I became, and I began my work in Tennessee. And I had one period when I didn't work in the field, which brought me to the state of Nebraska. In 2006, my husband and I worked as a family teaching couple at Boys Town, near Omaha, Nebraska. And I worked as we worked with school-age children, some with learning disabilities. So I've met some great people in the great state of Nebraska. And my son was also born in Nebraska, so it has a very special space in my heart. But I was feeling the tug to work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities after a year of being there. So we moved to Cincinnati, where I worked as a DSP, a program coordinator for people living in a 40-unit apartment building, and then on to Starfire 10 years ago, where I've held a number of roles, including my current role as senior community builder. Many of Starfire's mentors are part of this webinar series. I'm happy to be among John O'Brien and Beth Mount, who kicked off this webinar, and Jack Pearpoint and Linda Kahn, who will be presenting soon. I'm also very thankful for my colleagues, Candace Pillman, Tim and Bridget Vogt, and Carol Combs, who, as a close team, we've been able to work together and learn together. I couldn't be here, of course, without the many people I've been fortunate enough to support in building community, some of whom I'll get to share with you today. Like I said, I've been fortunate to learn about the work in the area of person-centered planning and supports since 2000, when I received training from the state of Tennessee on positive behavior supports to train DSPs and supervisors in their work. So this really does feel like a full circle moment. And of course, in my role in every organization I've worked in, including Starfire, that I've been involved in person-centered planning and work. So I'm hoping by the end of this webinar, we will know more about approaching a community building practice with openness and flexibility as we come alongside and lead the people we support toward having a more fulfilled life. In this webinar, I'm hoping I'm going to share the story of Starfire, primarily from the lens of the role of community builder, which is what I operate in. Although we've also returned to working directly with families, something we've done at the start of the organization. And I'll share how we are evolving and transforming as an organization. So we'll talk about these three main things that I've been learning. The first area will be understanding community building as a practice. What might it look like when DSPs approach their work as a practitioner of community building, co-creating with another person, and embracing the notion that whether we are on a small team, independent, or in a large organization, we can adopt a learning mindset to help us grow around the concept of citizenship and community building, and to see what we can help shape the kind of culture we all would want to live in. So this is what it's about, living in a kind of culture we want to live in. And then we'll consider the connections that people make and how those ties make a better community for people with disabilities and ordinary citizens. And finally, we'll look at a core example and a few other examples of how the people we support, community builders, families and teams and organizations, have been working together to help build community for and with people with disabilities. So a little bit about my learning approach as I have been involved in this wonderful work. As a direct support professional, I start out and try to remain a sponge, learning as much as I can when it comes to the people I support, learning about the person, their home, and the community environments that they live in, and the people dynamics that are surrounding them. I also take in as much as I can about the environment in which I work, including the organizational structure and the group I'm a part of and team dynamics, because I really feel that those are all important in understanding how I can go about my supportive work. In 2000, when I started working with people with disabilities in Tennessee, my role was mostly that of maintaining the person's quality of life. I worked with two elderly gentlemen who had spent over 50 years living in an institution. And at that time, the big push was to get people out into the community, out of the institutions and into community-based living arrangements. Then during the daytime, the focus was to get people into the general community. And depending on the setting, you could easily have multiple people with disabilities in the community, along with maybe one staff or two. And this model is still useful and happening today, pre-COVID, of course. But today, my learnings have led me to working one-on-one with people in their own communities to help them build their own tribe or tribes while honoring their own lived experiences. So today, Starfire exists to drastically or eliminate social isolation by connecting the people we serve with other ordinary citizens in the community who share similar interests. And let me tell you how we began and how we began to change the way we support people. Starfire was started by families in 1993 as a camp for young people with disabilities. Then they later began an evening and weekend recreational program with a volunteerism requirement. So eventually we added a day program that focused on recreation and leisure activities, and people would typically attend one day a week. So we would have a different group of people to support each day. And by the time I joined the organization in 2010, a second innovative day program had been developed. This program was different from any other program I had personally known of, in that we referred to people with disabilities as members, not clients. And these members could enroll in for 4 years, a time-sensitive design. So it wasn't a program where members could attend indefinitely. Most members were in their early 20s, with it being mostly a post-secondary educational focus. And members had a range of abilities. We worked with people who walked, who used a wheelchair or walking aids, were able to speak, use short phrases or a communication device, hearing and non-hearing. Maybe they had vision impairments, or maybe they were able to see. Some people had medical or behavioral conditions, while others did not. So that program's model was loosely based on a formal learning environment where members would participate for 4 years and then graduate. The first year was more of an exploration of the person's interest. So we'd have a lot of learning and fun led by community members. So these are people in the community that would just lead and teach. And they would come into the building, and as well as similar experiences out in the community. By the second year, members would begin to have experiences that narrowed their focus a bit more on their specific interests and neighborhoods. Members would begin building a social network around their own interests with our support and would invite others into a path, which is a person-centered planning process, where they could receive support, ideas, and accountability. And by the third year, members would begin developing ideas for a capstone community project based mostly through events in the community. The projects really sought to bring more people into the person's life and to amplify people's voices and personhood by placing them in a meaningful and socially valued role. Some of the projects were an annual Pedalpalooza, where neighbors along with the member and his family gathered together to ride their bikes and to raise money for a cause that they all cared about. Professionally produced play of the book Wadi Welcome and the Beloved Community, performed by several actors at a local theater in downtown Cincinnati to a sizable audience when a member's passion was to bring that play to life. And an annual Christmas concert, including members of the community who were gifted musicians and vocalists. The member's passion for Christmas time and his talent of playing the organ by ear led us to having these benefit concerts for 4 years, where we collected non-perishable items for the members' local food pantry. So by definition of a project, it means that you have many people with multiple touches working together over time. And that way, with a community project, you actually get to know other people because you have that project set up. So because we wanted to get degrees closer to providing more person-centered supports to community building, we maintained the day program while at the same time springing out small pods of about 3 to 4 members within the community. So this program design increased the chances of a single member being able to make more meaningful connections, while the supporting members would still have their own rich community experiences. Now, this practice also gave us more evidence about how a person's life might be reimagined. We also made the documentary Business as Unusual, where we talked about the decision to close our day program and our evening and weekend program in 2017. And in order to begin working with people one-on-one in the community. So for 30 years, we ran 1,200 activities. And at the peak, we worked with about 500 people with disabilities. We were getting people out into the community instead of people being at home alone. And at that time, we did it in the way that we knew to do it, which was large groups of people with disabilities, along with 1 or 2 staff people. So our programming was interrupted. And it started with a disruptive and powerful question from families. Families began asking us, what's going to happen to my adult son or daughter when I am no longer able to provide care for them and no longer alive to love them? There was not a quality answer at the time for these families. We did not have an answer. So we started shifting our thinking through thoughtful and inclusive planning experiences. And the work we began doing after we closed our programs to work with people directly was a way to get closer to that answer. We also began asking ourselves the hard and uncomfortable question: could our outings and programs actually be contributing to people with disabilities' social isolation? And some distinctions we began to notice were we were providing short-term fun versus long-term quality of life with ordinary citizens who shared the same talents and interests, passions, strengths, positive affiliations, and neighborhoods, as we've learned and leaned into the asset-based community development learning that John McKnight and others offer. And we kept asking ourselves more questions like, were members experiencing meaning, true safety by being truly known and having a life that mattered outside of the programming that we helped to create or sustain? Another distinction we began to notice was how we as direct support staff could easily serve as the endpoint versus as the connector to the ordinary citizens. in the community, and even how families might serve as connectors with people that they knew. Curiously enough, though, we didn't have a question from the community at the time because we hadn't really engaged or found ways to activate the community all that much. So we began exploring the question, what might a member's life look like that included inviting other people who were ordinary citizens into our program design? And how do we even design something new based on the program that we already had? How would we create the opportunities for social connection outside of a service delivery system to form while still maintaining the health and safety and welfare of the people we support? Something that wasn't based solely on staff's scheduling, people's activities in groups. So we just wondered what else might be able to branch out. In the early 90s, Jack Peeler, a local researcher, began asking the question, who's in your life, to 51 people with disabilities. The answers were not too surprising in some areas, but it was quite revealing around community building and its potential for further exploration. So here we see that of the 51 people polled, there were about 7 to 8 family members when that are parents, maybe grandparents and siblings and aunts and uncles, cousins. And then there were about 24 paid human services there on the left, who help people with disabilities in their home life, whether they require medical or non-medical care, transportation to places like work, assistance with work, and support in their recreational life. There were on average 68 other people with disabilities in the person's life. When we begin to understand that, and you can see that on the right with the green people there. But when we begin to understand the potential for devaluation, this number is very alarming because it represents the reality that people with disabilities are largely in a world created for them to be managed, congregated, and oftentimes segregated based on the label of disability, especially since the bottom quadrant space was not equal or greater in number, which brings me to that bottom space there, where we notice so few friends, an average of 2.5, and very few other citizens like themselves, which were an average of about 2.75. So we became very curious about this because we realized that we could affect change here without disrupting the other sections too much. And just maybe we could learn how to activate and engage 2 of the 3 quadrants a bit. So the other harsh reality, if you notice on the bottom of this slide, there's a note. The research found was that 9 out of 51 had no one in their life aside from paid staff and people with disabilities. So a person's life could be completely filled 100% with services along with the good and well-intended people who are in that world. We imagined the limited points of reference the person might have, the limited choices, the people dynamics that might arise from this reality. So we began making a gradual shift with the new knowledge that we acquired. For example, when we ran our day program, we would have someone come in and teach an amazing card making class series, so multiple classes, and everyone could take their cards home, and that was success at that time. But after learning about the 51 people research, we began asking, what if this time we made thank you cards for one member's farming community, their farming community, as a way to deepen those relationships. So it's the same activity, but now with the focus to increase more authentic relationships with ordinary citizens that could lead to more interactions and possible friendships over time. So that's where we began putting a lot of our energies and efforts toward helping to create an ideal culture by building a robust social network with and for people so that they could be more involved in their own community and their own social connections could have a chance to happen. But we also wondered, what if it didn't work? What we were finding was that it takes time. It takes more time, and it was less efficient to work with people one-on-one, as you might imagine. Yet we kept believing that it was possible to help people develop their social connections, their tribe, while still operating in a current service model that would eventually give way to something new. So we didn't stop that right away. We just, we did both. We had people go work one-on-one with people in the community. And then we also kept the program going. So what we heard consistently is, although members missed seeing people that they knew all the time within a group setting, the benefits of having a more personalized one-on-one approach and going out into the community as a community builder and member pairing felt much better for people. Carol, for instance, she's one of the members, she said, "I miss being in the building, but now I don't have to wait to do things that I want to do or have to take turns." So it became a new way to value people and their time that brought about the possibility for more social connections that just wasn't there before. Members were feeling proud of themselves and feeling good about making contributions in ways that felt distinctly their own. So community building as a practice, I should define what community building is. And it is a practice where it takes time to discover, connect, and activate ordinary citizens with people we support. Person-centered planning is done in settings such as annual planning sessions, as you might know, or in futures planning for people. We used the PATH model to engage our members, their families, and citizens in what was positive and possible. But we also began to expand our understanding of what person-centered planning was. And we looked at how it could work in a person-centered approach that informed our work. So as Beth Mount has said, it's not solely a plan, but it's a very complex interaction of social dynamics, investments, and commitments we make to the process that leads to real and authentic change. You're getting to know the person and the family and their lives as a first action. And you're growing in understanding of their vision and hopes of that person. And then to take direction from that wisdom that you've gathered and that knowledge and information from that person. Jack Pierpoint's definition of a person-centered approach is being acutely focused on the capacities of a person, anybody, anywhere, at any time. I like that definition because it deals with capacity building. John O'Brien describes person-centered approaches and planning as an idealized design that you can plan around. It is making the distinction of what you want to create rather than what you want to get away from. So we use our time with people to help walk out what a person-centered approach might look like as we journey with them on a regular basis. And we notice what's already present, like what are their assets and capacities already, and we just build from there. As a community builder, it helped me to build community in my neighborhood as well. So I came home and I shared with my husband, Herman, about the work that I was doing. And it was really exciting. I was telling him the work that I was beginning to do, and we set forth to lean deeper into our own community. We started visiting a local church, for instance, with members of diverse backgrounds and abilities that was within walking distance from our home. It wasn't long before I joined the choir and led women's small group, and my husband went on men's camping trips and also delivered the sermons many times at this community church. Our children also participated in the Vacation Bible School and Advent presentations. So we've had a lot of conversations with our neighbors, even on Halloween, for instance, as we sat in front of our homes to pass out treats to the kids. During the pandemic, our family hosted several outdoor concerts that everyone on our street could enjoy. We invited our neighbors, we brought out our lawn chairs, snacks, and some even invited their own family members to attend. Everyone was on their own lawns. And what's been really nice is seeing our neighbors host 2 more concerts on our street after we got it kind of going. So that was really great. So let's talk a little bit about citizen advocacy as an approach to community building. Citizen advocacy is about connecting and reconnecting people who have become isolated from the ordinary community. Its roots are in the formal recruitment, pairing, and supporting of local citizens who engage in one-to-one matches of citizens with intellectual and developmental disabilities within the person's community. So this might include protection from neglect and harm, advocacy for inclusion, and better civic and social opportunities. In other words, helping the person be safe and involved in their own communities. So we started exploring what it might look like at Starfire to have more than one advocate match to a person with a disability, but rather have 2 or 3 ordinary citizens in each area of the person's life. Now, we know this is a big goal because so many people with disabilities experience social isolation. And so we thought that it might be a little difficult to have 2 or 3 people in every aspect of their lives. But it allowed for us as community builders to keep working at it, because there are so many areas in a person's life where we might discover other ordinary citizens to connect with based on similar interests. In his book, Untethered, David Shu talks about appreciating the weak ties in our lives, as well as the strong ties. So recall, right before we began this work of bringing people into the community on a one-to-one basis, we didn't have a compelling question from people within the community. Here we began to imagine and formulate the question for the ordinary citizen and member. We asked the question, will you take this person's participation as seriously as you take your own in this hiking club or this artist collective or this annual concert? Here's what we found when we engaged citizens into our work of building authentic community. In many cases, it mattered whether the connections are weak ties or strong ties as to what answer we might receive back from the community member. We put the weak ties and the strong ties in context in this table here. So this table is based on whether the ask, that question of will you take the person's participation as seriously as your own, was an informal and general one or a specific, more focused one, and whether we were making the ask of a cold contact or loose tie, or warm contact and strong tie. So the invitation usually takes more than one interaction, and it's over time, as it usually becomes clearer on when we should make that ask. So for instance, the bottom left represents an informal and cold ask where the person has weak ties and loose connections. Then we move up to the top left to a specific and cold ask where there are typically shared activities, but no perceivable connection at that point. And next, on the bottom right, we have an informal and warm ask where there are typically shared connections and budding chemistry. You start seeing chemistry form, beginning with the person that you're supporting and the member in the community. And at the top right, we have a warm specific ask where there are solid shared connections, strong community and strong chemistry and strong ties. Here is where we begin to see the person's community connections taking on a life of its own on that top right. So weak ties aren't bad, I should say. A 2014 study found that the more weak ties a person has, like your neighbors or a barista at a neighborhood coffee shop or fellow member at a community workout class, the happier they feel. Maintaining this network of acquaintances also contributes to a person's sense of belonging to a community. We just found that by considering these minor brushes of socialization, not as dispendable interactions, but rather something to count in community building, they have been extremely helpful. So weak ties are okay, and strong ties are long lasting and even lead to other new ties. And we also begin to discern when there is a successful enough connection to begin transitioning our role as a community connector so that the ordinary citizen can lean in more fully. Then we might begin connecting the person in other ways and with other people. Now, this is done carefully and thoughtfully, and it's over time and with intentional conversation, all while continually inviting ordinary citizens into more connections. We found that we can continually invite people in community using the 8 sectors of life, or the wheel of life, and the 5 valued experiences and 5 accomplishments. There's so many areas of life that people can experience fulfillment at varying degrees, as you might know, with other ordinary citizens, including community association that you see there at the top, creative expression, spiritual and religious experiences, and learning, for instance. We focus on the ordinary citizen and the community member here, with those connections. But we also knew that the families and their support can be vital, which I'll show you one example a little later. And these areas can all be comprised of weak or strong ties with people based on similar interests. So below are the 5 valued experiences introduced by John O'Brien and Connie Lau O'Brien that drive the work of community builders to ensure that we are supporting people to experience these whenever we are doing our work. So I kind of use this as a job description. Am I sharing places, making choices, making contributions, growing in relationships and experiencing respect? Am I helping the person to do that? We also wondered what it might look like to combine this. Let me go here. We also wondered what it might look like to combine this with the people map, a form of asset mapping around humans created by our mentors, John O'Brien, Linda Kahn, and Jack Pierpoint. What if we could use the people map to the right to identify the weak and strong ties that a person had in relationship to the 8 sectors of life and the 5 valued experiences and accomplishments? So in other words, as the circle gets closer to the person, that's the strong tie. And as it ebbs out on the people map, those are weaker ties. By the way, these all, again, they serve as my job description in the complex work of person-centered approaches to community building. It's on a continuum. So we ask ourselves at any point in our work as community builders, is the person we're supporting experiencing meaningful relationships, whether weak or strong ties? To what degree is the person having the 5 valued experiences? And are they experiencing any one of these experiences at greater degrees with a particular person in the community where that thread might be followed and expanded upon? And how might I, as a community builder, help to support the person to experience these? So as we layer the people map on top to notice the people who show up in these areas, we can get closer to engaging real life ordinary citizens. In his popular podcast, How to Citizen, Baratunde Thurston uses the word citizen as a verb. I need to grab my thought about everything, but I needed to get this. I gotta get this plugged in. Okay, sorry about that. That was my reminder. When the screen went dim, I said, okay, don't want that. Yes. So he uses the word citizen as a verb, and that's a very interesting approach because he urges people to see the structure and systems that exclude others as an important element to building community. And Thurston says structure is simply the collective stories that we all buy into. So if we change the stories, we can change the realities, which often changes the rigid systems. He talks about ways we can participate in community life that leads us all a little more hopeful and connected and poised to act. So there's a picture of him in one of the podcasts. And as community builders, we are learning how to citizen, and we are engaging with people who want to citizen with the people we support. around things that they collectively care about. So now let's look at a few examples. Michelle and I work together currently as a community building pair in her neighborhood. We met in 2015, and at that time, our one-on-one community building design question was, how might it look if both the member we supported and the community builder lived near each other and both cared about the same things so that they can work on them together? In other words, in what ways could we work with the person more versus for the person while doing our direct support community job? Cashel lives in a neighboring community close to me, and we both love our neighborhoods. In our first meeting, she expressed that she loved being around kids and getting her hands messy with paint. It took us a little while to get started and get something going in the community. Lots of introductions and meeting people in coffee shops and exploring the neighborhood and volunteer opportunities. But then I introduced Cashel to Alicia. She's there in the middle, who I knew from my neighborhood. Alicia lived and worked in Cashel's neighborhood, and she also worked in the community garden and raised chickens in her backyard. So as Cashel and I began to talk to Alicia, we learned that she was an artist, but she had been painting mostly in her home and had wanted to paint with other people. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking this connection could be a really good thing. It could really blossom possibly. So Cashel and I kept coming back each time we were invited so that she could help with gardening and feeding the chickens. We eventually all started painting in one of the welcoming community spaces there in the neighborhood. And in 2017, we formed the Lower Price Hill Artists Collective, which engaged youth and other neighbors, primarily focused on social practice art. Now, social practice art is a collaborative, community-driven work that engages with social issues. So we developed a 12-month artist in residence program, and then later added a 6-month artist apprenticeship program. Cashel applied for the first artist in residence role, interviewing and submitting community art ideas. And as her community builder, her co-community builder, I helped her complete her application and have a successful interview with visual prompts. But she was clearly on a roll herself when she wanted to see in her community things like cleaner streets and brightly colored crosswalks and rethinking the blighted spaces and what they could be. Cashel got the position as the artist in residence, which came with a stipend to help her fund her projects. So Cynthia, another resident of Cashel's neighborhood, started coming to the collective, and she's there too at the top. She is a fantastic jewelry designer and community volunteer, and she became the second artist in residence at the collective. Reba is the new local community-based grocer who came along and responded to the voices of the community for a grocery store where the community members serve as a genuine part of it. So this year, the collective was invited by Reba to partner with the store to create Collected Goods. It's a showcase of makers and artists from the collective. Now, collective goods can be found in front of the retail space on Tuesdays under the tent with tables selling fresh fruit, vegetables, artist wares, including Cashel and her paintings and potted aloe vera plants. Collected Goods also has an internet presence. So here are a few pictures of Cashel and her community building journey so far. This is Cashel putting up flyers there in the middle. She was a co-captain of the Cincinnati Neighborhood Games for her neighborhood. And the Cincinnati Neighborhood Games is a biannual friendly citywide competition of everyday games that people can play. And so there were children, men and women and adult co-ed teams. And below that picture, you can see in the middle, down below, she was a co-captain at the giant Jenga competition for these games. We learned that if you want to attract more people for the tryouts, that you need to hold them in walkable parts of the neighborhood, but this particular neighborhood, because a lot of people don't drive. So that was one of our lessons that we learned. And then there's Cashel talking with Alicia on the bottom left and with an AmeriCorps member. And then Cashel at the library's makerspace on the right, helping to print the big vinyl signs so that neighbors can reimagine blighted spaces in the community. Cashel hosted a story fest where children got to paint a community mural, and you'll see that at the top left, and then a planning meeting in the middle there at a local coffee house about Story Fest. And then Cashel, Alicia, and Cynthia on the right, top right, at the gala to accept the collective's Visionary Award that they received a couple of years ago. And the collective goods tent where Cashel and other vendors showcase their wares in the neighborhood. That's at the bottom left. And at the bottom right is a recent interview with Julia, the 4th artist in residence, and Cashel, who was the 1st artist in residence. Now at the top there, you can see Cashel and Alicia as Cashel was feeding the chickens there, and then a meeting at the Artist Collective on the top right. And as you can see, the makers and artists includes performing artists as well as visual artists. Cashel helping in the garden there at the bottom left. And then at the bottom right, there's a recent virtual meetup of the collective to plan out our events. So we were meeting during this, we've been meeting during the COVID season virtually. So Alicia, Cynthia, and Reba are a part of Cashel's Ordinary Citizens Tribe. They met Cashel at different times in their community building journey and advocate for Cashel's participation in the collective and the collective goods tent. And they are the ones who call to see how she is doing. I wanted to show you this slide that recently came up. Last month, Reba shared this image with the vendors at the collected goods. It's a beautiful full-sized banner that will hang in the retail space. The banner is filled with each of the vendors' names, pictures, and what they offer. And Cashel is one of those vendors. She feels so good about that. Let me just go to hers. There she is there, the second one from the top. She feels really good about how things have unfolded for her with things that are going on in the neighborhood on Tuesdays. So things take time. And it takes time to get to the point where you can look around and say you have a good life, a life where you are experiencing 5 values and 5 accomplishments that you see here. So at the intersection of belonging and being respected is community participation. Cashel has places to walk those values out and has discovered 3 people who will make sure that she shows up in the neighborhood. At the intersection of being respected and sharing ordinary places, Cashel has found a valued role as artist, founder, and vendor. And at the intersection of choosing and belonging, there is autonomy and freedom, where Cashel and her guardian decides on her level of involvement, especially on rainy and cold days. And so between contributing and choosing, Cashel develops competency on what to choose and how to best contribute. Though the collective, within the collective, they actually have a team leadership approach and they make group decisions that benefit the larger group. So Cashel can still make choices and contributions that fit her needs and wants. So who are our team members in this? Anyone who leads, follows, or supports the person in designing a person-centered life is our team member. Beginning with the person themselves. What are their hopes and dreams, and what has the person said or demonstrated that's important to them? DSPs, direct support professionals, who operate like embedded journalists, knowing, telling, and retelling the story of the person we support. They're like an architect who helps to design and build a culture in the community that the person would want to live in and that we'd also want to live in. Are there mentors, allies, colleagues, and team members who can leverage their relationships to help create sacred community spaces for the person that is not a space where grouping of people with disabilities occur? Do the family members we've built relationships with know of others who share the same interests as the person we're supporting? And are there people in other parts of the service delivery system, like service support administrators and supervisors and managers, who can help us hold that sacred community and social space for the person? Who are the ordinary citizens and neighbors we might discover who are inclined to show up when we extend an invitation? And can organizational leaders offer key support and championing from work systems that make the work of community building easier? There may be others who we're not thinking of who can also be considered a part of the team. But one of the mind shifts that we had to make was that they are all potential people on the team to helping the person build community. These are all potential people on the team. So another way that I like to look at it is this way. It's I've looked at who's on the team when we began to continue to journey the journey of building community as a practice. I also recognize that not every work environment lends itself to this fluid learning and that there may be solid boundaries. So I want to make sure I say that too, because I work at a company where there's a lot of autonomy and support, and I recognize that not every place has that. But here you see three key people in the center: the community builder, the person who the person-centered work is directly benefiting, and the citizen whom we are wishing to engage with. And it just ebbs out from there. So the core person is connected to their family, wherever involved, and then the service delivery system that supports the person. The community builder has access to their immediate service team and supervisor, then on to the larger organization. And then the ordinary citizen is connected to the specific community group of people or focus area, then the larger community. So any one of these circles represent potential relationships and connections that can lend itself to bringing about a higher quality of life for the person. And once we know that we are helping to create a sacred community space with and for the person, we can better operate as an ecosystem like this, offering more authentic and effective, long-lasting support. So here are a couple of examples of that sort of team ecosystem or ecosystem operating. After his senior project at Starfire, Nick has been practicing Kundalini yoga and metaphysics for years and has deepened relationships with two people in the School of Metaphysics. However, he and I land on the practical uses of mindfulness and have co-hosted a recurring half-hour of healing meetup on Zoom, where we practice community mindfulness with others. And this is an example where maybe Starfire has helped to promote the meetups so that the ordinary citizens from all over can be a part of that. So that's what you see a picture of. One of my other favorites. Zach and I invited Anne, you see her on the left, top left, and Zach's on the right. He invited Anne to do a short video project for elementary students. Anne is a friend of Zach and his family, and who shares the same interest of spreading peace in the community. And Zach also loves music. So his mom gave us Anne's contact information about a month ago, and Zach lives within a mile from the elementary school. And so what we were able to do is be able to do this video, make this 5-minute video, and be able to send it to the school. And we have connected with an ally at the school who will use this for students as opposed to timeouts. So it's an alternative to timeouts. So we just suggest that we keep asking questions. That's one of the biggest things. You know, we found that when we kept asking powerful, often challenging and uncomfortable questions, we began to get proximate to helping the person build a social network of ordinary and caring citizens who understood what they were up against. We asked families, who do you know in the community who also enjoys or has an interest in the thing that the person is interested in? Or where might you be able to offer some support in community building? We've asked ordinary citizens who emerge as possible connectors, will you be able to take this person's participation as seriously as you take your own? And we've asked support staff, how might you help support the person to maintain his or her own sacred community space? We've asked ourselves as community builders, how might we contribute to the design of a positive community with the person that we're supporting in mind? And how might we tell a new story or multiple stories of the person that we're supporting, so that we don't get stuck in a single story of disability or limitations, but rather possibilities. Here are just a few of the resources that we've compiled over the years and that we use. All of these are familiar to a lot of people. There may be some new ones like trauma-informed care. I know that's a newer type of training. And then also empathy building, which is on there too. It's an immersive participatory learning that we've discovered. So all of these are steeped in research, and we just use it to practice our work. So as I wind down, I'm reminded of the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. In nature, there's a reason geese fly in a V formation. It's not because there's one set leader, but because by flying in this way, the whole flock achieves a 70% greater flying range than if each bird flew alone. A V formation flying pattern also allows all the geese to visualize the goal from where they're flying. When one falls out of formation, it immediately feels the drag and friction of flying alone. This goes for one of in the front position who switches out into another part of the V to let another goose lead. They quickly get back in formation and feel the benefit of leverage and collective flight. When there's a wounded goose who falls, two other geese stay with it until it either dies or can fly again. And they either catch up with the original V formation or join another. What does all this have to do with community building? I've just learned that organizations and systems aren't perfect, and neither are we. They need us to show up in ways that bring our whole selves to bear. And when we learn together through the growing pains of failing forward and, of the small wins and victories, we will all be better for it. And we will help each other through a person-centered approach. And the people we support will be better, the families will be better, the direct support professionals who view community building as a practice will be better, the service and support staff and organizations will be better, and citizens and communities who lean in will be better. So I encourage all of us to keep being curious when it comes to getting to know other ordinary citizens and the shared places in the community, so we can continually introduce people we support to them, to lead with the person's interests and the passions and strengths and positive affiliations in our conversations and in our actions, and courageously do the things that make you feel a little uncomfortable at first, like placing your body in spaces where you would not normally otherwise do so, as you support others in their community. And to know that things do take time as we tell and retell the story of community building with the person we support as a major part of the whole, because we're all still learning how to citizen together. So I'd just like to thank you very much. That's all I have today.